Good morning. Thanks so much for stopping by our session, that which I think will be a really interesting and scintillating conversation centering around the ideas of relevance and excellence, and relevance equaling excellence, and how the anti-thematic argument against that is just a non-starter, or at least should be a non-starter. I have hung out with this amazing panel here. I think they're going to really give us some words of wisdom to chew on. I'm really jazzed about sharing the stage with them. And I think before we jump into it, it would be great for us to introduce ourselves to you so you know who's before you. And I'd like to start with Angie, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Angie Durrell. I am the founder and executive director of In Tempo, an organization based in Connecticut, committed, and our mission is to make classical music and folkloric instruments and repertoire relevant, accessible, and inclusive. So relevance was always at the heart of everything that I sought to do. I am a violinist by training, born in Ecuador, and migrated to the United States. So I was always, like a lot of people in the room here, the only Latina, or one of a handful of Latinas in the class, in the orchestra, in a concert, and my community was not represented in it, and I wanted to do something about it, and that is how In Tempo came about. We have 5 programs, and today, in terms of the relevance equals is a synonym of excellence. I'll be talking about our annual cultural crossover concert, which is our flagship event, with over 100 musicians on stage. It's a sellout concert. And our whole purpose is to make the music and the symphony and the cultural repertoire relevant to everybody. So I'm pleased to talk to you about it later, and thank you for being here.
Wayne?
I'm Wayne Brown, and you have my affiliation, which is the Michigan Opera Theater currently. I've just observed my 5th anniversary. I grew up in Detroit, returned to the city to take on the leadership of Michigan Opera Theater. Prior to that, my career began with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra for a number of years, and then off to other things, including the National Endowment for the Arts, when I was head of music and opera for that agency. I've come back to Detroit specifically to provide leadership following a 45 tenure of its founder, David DiChiara, who created Michigan Opera Theater 4 years following the racial unrest in the city. The whole notion of creating opera in Detroit that would have as its core a focus in downtown, to be part of the resurgence, to be part of redefining an opera for the city, an opera that would be reflective of a diverse communities, an opera that would be reflective of the community in which we serve, both on stage, off stage, governance, and volunteers. I look forward to elaborating on elements of engagement, and my focus is engagement more so than relevance, because unless you have meaningful engagement, you can't get to the relevance.
Good morning. God, it's early. I'm Terence Patterson. I'm our executive director and artistic director of the Ritz Chamber Players. We're based out of Jacksonville, Florida. We're an ensemble of black musicians from all over the world, and we have a concert series in Jacksonville with many programs to do a similar mission statements that we all are here to diversify the cultural arts. So we try to work very hard in that space through a concert series format. I'm looking forward to talking more about what we do and engaging some of your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Derek Minchin, and I am professor of the humanities and music at Polk State College in Central Florida. In addition to that, I founded their first ever philosophy club, which is now the Philosophy in Cinema and Literature and Animation Club. I also am the progenitor of Voices of the People, a chamber music series there, which, amongst other things, seeks to highlight and feature internationally prominent musicians of color. So that's that side. I also, aside from that, am a professor of gender, race, and class course, a Marxian text, which really gets the students really fired up and keeps me on edge and lets me tap into that side of myself that's the angry black man. You dig? I don't just wear the Malcolm X glasses. I try to channel him a little bit, and I think that's important in this milieu. I'm also a multi-instrumentalist and a producer who just dropped an album that, you know, people seem to dig a little bit, and it's got me singing and playing a whole bunch of different stuff. But I purposely picked repertoire that reflected my experience, what I grew up with as a black man in the South. You dig? So I got some hymns on there. I've got Fly Me to the Moon, but for, you know, I grew up listening to Nat King Cole and Brooke Benton and all those guys. So I do a lot of different things. And so to be able to talk about relevance equaling excellence with such esteemed colleagues is really a blast for me. And I want to let you know that Slido is available, so, you know, if you have questions for us, please avail yourself to that. And the microphone for questions is right in the middle of the aisle there. So let's jump right in and indulge me for a minute. I'm going to dig into my professorial head because I'm a nerd at heart. So when I see words, I immediately want to deconstruct them. So when I saw relevance and excellence, I meditated on those terms for like 48 hours. I'm like, okay, what are we talking about here? Obviously, we're talking about diversifying and representation. But it made me think of how received narratives shape our minds, right? And how history is really a created thing, because history sometimes is no more and no less than a set of stories told to us by people we often don't know about things that happened by people we know even less. And so it sort of calls upon us to have a faith in and a trust upon the person telling us the stories about things we can never get back to. And so I'm thinking of a specific narrative as an artist who does a lot of things in different mediums. I was thinking of the late 19th century. Go with me here, right? And we're dealing with modernism. And if it's late 19th century, we're going into the melding of modernism into postmodernism, this sort of melange that happens due to post-colonialism. And we often say that there are 3, sometimes 4 philosophers of suspicion, we call them, that shaped the psychological and social fabric of the 20th century, all the angst that was going on, because right after the Industrial Revolution, there's a lot of changes going on. There's a lot of paradigms that are breaking down, right? Philosophy no longer meant what it meant once before. Religion is eroding for Europe. Also, science is changing. So you've got these 4 philosophers of suspicion. You have Marx, who was suspicious of how we view time and how humans interact with it and sort of shuttle themselves down the chute of time. He specifically rejected the linear notion of time and opted instead for a cyclical version through which subjugating of peoples happens over and over again. And so he believed that the revolution must be continual. And then you have Friedrich Nietzsche, the polemicist, who was paranoid about everything and sort of embodied this whole angst and neurotic vibe that had the age of modernism nicknamed the age of anxiety. Which brings me to Sigmund Freud, who was suspicious of how we work with the artifacts in our unconscious and conscious minds, and Albert Einstein, who replaces the paradigm of the Newtonian version of time and all this, and replaces it with his own sort of revolutionary time-space continuum. All right, that's a mouthful, and fine. But the point is, I've mentioned 4 dead white European men. You dig? And if I were to, when I tell my students this, wouldn't it be nicer if I could have included at least 2 names around the same time who were active, Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois? Would that not make it more relevant to some demographics that we are all here to give a hoot about? Not only that, W.E.B. Du Bois and Karl Marx were both influenced by the same German philosopher, Hegel, who deals with this stuff we don't need to get into, but he deals with the idea of called the Hegelian dialectic. It's talking about arguing in the way you have 2 ideas that are set and pitted against one another. And what happens is there's an intermarriage of ideas and a fighting of ideas, and this is how the dialectic operates. Marx took that and talked about how human beings flow through history, through this sometimes antagonistic, sometimes synergistic relationship, and that's how we get through history. W.B. Du Bois thought the very same thing, but Marx got a lot more bang for his buck and became more famous for this narrative. So what I'm getting at is, by taking the narrative that we're going to hand to others and sort of owning it and sort of representing some individuals of color who can make it relevant and pertinent to people we be talking to, I'd like to ask, and I'd like to start with you, Angie, how do you define the terms relevance and excellence, and how do you and your organization specifically seek to make your presentations palatable, engaging, and pertinent for your audience?
Yeah, thanks for the preface. So I am definitely a Latina woman of color, and that is how I define everything that I go about and everything that has brought me to where I am today, even on this panel. And excellence definitely leads to relevance. So as artists in an excellent artistry, we put ourselves in a role model position. And I think about excellence as internal and relevance as external as well. And the work that we do at Intempo, specifically focusing on bringing a light to folkloric cultures and instruments, is to make music a great cultural equalizer. So there's not one Western mentality versus a non-Western mentality, and that fight of, well, European is better and Latin America and maybe substandard or from developing countries. And my whole purpose in all of the programming that we do within Tempo is really to not just play justice, but really share, that a native instrument can play Bach, and that a native instrument will reflect the voices of a community, that perhaps by using different repertoire and thinking outside the box, it will be a hook that will lead us to audience development, institutional awareness, and youth and community development. So that's how we frame all of our programs. That's how I myself frame all of the projects that I decide to be a part of. And I would really love for you to see a 3-minute video of our large-scale cross-cultural concert showing a full symphony orchestra with a whole ensemble of native steel pan drums. So please join me in watching this video. Is there sound? Wait. And while we have the audio development, when I was starting in Tempo, it was hard for me to be able to make a case as to how can I ask a symphony orchestra, in this case, a youth symphony orchestra, to take a chance and to be willing to program a steel pan ensemble and play Bach with a symphony orchestra as well. But then when we showed them that artistic excellence is going to be at the forefront, and artistic merit in everything that we do as an organization, and once they saw a full house, basically, it was a project that was renewed. Thank you.
I'm excited for the concert because you get to play and you get to show people your talent and your experiences about music. And you get them trophies.
Fusion concert features multicultural repertoire, combining classical music and traditional music from cultures that represent the diversity of our local communities.
This concert is always so special because it brings together a symphonic side and a completely native or non-Western instrumentation.
Our musicians have an opportunity to perform for a full concert hall of almost 1,000 people that represent a much more diverse audience than is typically at our concert.
We're very proud that our audience age is, young professionals, children, families come together.
Tonight, we celebrate a language that unites us, the language of music.
Every year we perform with this band, a new band. My favorite song of the concert was Viv Viv Mi Vida.
It was different from what I've usually played because I tend to play more classical pieces, so that was the first time that I had played a piece of music that's like played on the radio.
It brought together our children's choir singing in multiple languages. It brought together our symphonic partners and the steel drum ensemble.
It was cool hearing all the noises at once.
When classical music and more familiar musical traditions are performed side by side, classical music becomes relevant to everyone.
This was the vision of this thing that we saw in 2012 and saying, wow, this can really be done and we need to show all types of audiences that this is possible. Thank you. So that is how we approach relevance and excellence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. Wayne, I'd like to ask a question of you. I know by talking with you that engagement is so very important to you, and it should be important to us as well, but can you sort of open that up a bit and discuss with us what specifically about this relationship between relevance and engagement is so important?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to Angie because I think it underscores the investment that we must make at a very early time in a child's life. And it's in order to be able to effectively convey what we do with an audiences that we hope to attract, we need that early orientation, that early introduction, the nurturing, the feeding of the soul, the spirit, and the mind through programs such as that which Angie is exercising in her organization, and as so many of you are also doing in your respective communities. I make that point for another reason, and that has to do with my own experience in public schools made an incredible impact on what I do today. And by that I mean the opportunity to be able to take advantage of we didn't refer to it as music education or arts education at the time. We talked about the importance of that music and art played in our lives. The opportunity to be able to participate with fellow classmates in small string ensembles. The opportunity to have private lessons that were made available because a teacher saw a promise in what I was attempting to do and made arrangements for me to have private lessons. I was poor, but I had no idea that we were poor because it was such a nurturing experience that was not about whether or not you were rich or poor. It had more to do with whether or not you had the opportunity, access, and the nurturing that was just so important in our family, in our community. So one of the things that we face as a society today in the U.S. is the absence of that same kind of concentration that has built up a certain baseline for audiences that we are trying to engage. And relevance cannot be achieved instantly. It has to be, you may have certain moments. You may be engaged by a particular work. You may be captured by a certain sonic or a certain visual experience. But that can potentially only be on a surface level. When I made reference earlier to the creation of Michigan Opera Theater, it gives me an opportunity which served as for me an attraction to come back to Detroit, from the point of view that when I think about the kind of role that I knew I experienced, the call was not only to see what I could contribute to Michigan Opera Theater, but to also see what we can contribute to our community. Because unless we take a holistic approach to the nurturing and of our artists and our audiences alike, we missed, I think, a very important moment. When David DeChiara created the opera company in Detroit, 1971, as I mentioned earlier, it was a time that he said, I want to make sure that not only do we have a great opera company in the city, because all major cities, it was in his view, deserve a meaningful opera program. It wasn't just about opera. It was about the opportunity to partner with other professional groups, to partner with school systems, to partner with individual educators, to make a commitment to the stage, where artists felt safe, where artists felt nurtured, where artists found a place of affirmation. Michigan Opera Theater happened to take a lead in roles on careers such as Kathleen Battle, who made her operatic debut in Detroit, who took the leadership role in nurturing the careers of the likes of Carmen Balthrop, Maria Ewing, where the extraordinary tenor who had the first contract with Metropolitan Opera, George Shirley, who lives in Detroit, could have also a place where he could collaborate with David DeChiara in nurturing the idea of fostering meaningful work here in our city. So the whole notion of the sense of relevance for me has to do with not only the opportunity for the performance to take place or for a classroom session, but also has to do with investing in a dream, investing in a direction, investing in the kind of evolution of what art and culture can be for a community. And in that regard, the whole notion of when Margaret Gardner was premiered here in Detroit with Toni Morrison, based on Toni Morrison's work Beloved, the opportunity to be able to invest not only into the instrumentalists or the singers, but the composer, the librettist, the stage director, the conductors. Leslie Dunner was one of very early conductors of when we presented dance here in Detroit. Michigan Opera Theater is the only opera company in the U.S. to present a dance series in addition to its role with opera. So the holistic approach has to do with not only what we do within our walls, but the roles that we play within our community. As such, the notion of partnering with various organizations, not just for specific attraction, but to introduce new audiences. Misty Copeland, shortly after she was named principal, a prima ballerina with American Ballet Theater 3 years ago, had one of her first appearances and as a principal dancer here on the Detroit Opera House stage, as part of American Ballet Theater. And it was interesting because the audience showed up, and although she had a relatively small role, there was an audience expectation. Well, why wasn't, if she was a principal dancer, why wasn't she the lead? Well, it underscored the fact that we use these various terms to describe a particular place in which one has evolved in terms of the artistry. And being named a principal dancer is a very significant role. When she returned last year in performance of Romeo and Juliet, then she had the lead role. And so it's all part of making sure that as we invest in the artists and things that take place on our stage, we must be equally invested in our community and ways in which we engage our community. Not just a flash, just to talk about a particular date and time, but what are we doing to nurture the curiosity? What are we doing to nurture the interest and to create an appetite And once we have created that audience, what are we doing to sustain them and to re-engage them? So I'm of the view that the relevance comes about in time, and the relevance comes about through investment, and the relevance comes about in terms of being intentional, and it's something that it's not that you've arrived, it's that it's part of a continuing journey.
Amazing. Thank you. Very, very wonderful answer. So, Terence, I want to kind of break something down with you. In a lot of ways, you and I do the very same thing. We both are progenitors of chamber music series in Florida, as a matter of fact, right? Just a little bit north of me. And I'll talk about mine a little bit maybe. But you are doing works often of black composers. And your audience, you've reached out to a demographic of a lot of black individuals there in Jacksonville. I know the area very well. Talk to me about how that looks, like what demographic studies you did to make this happen, how you engage your audiences. Talk to us about what your programs are like and what you're trying to do through the Rich Chamber Ensemble.
Well, so you started with the idea of black composers. I'll go there first. Yes, we do, because that's a part of every program we do. We bring on that forth, historic composers and definitely living composers. And in that particular space, of course, we want to be a venue that for composers' compositions, and we wish we were together more, because we're finding so many emerging or great composers that are around. I mean, we were talking to Arthur this morning, and I was just like, we were just blown away by the number of young composers that we're seeing just around here at the conference. It's fantastic. And even in that idea, we're just starting a partnership with the Curtis Institute for compositions. There's a young composers competition that'll be going on this summer, and what's happening is that Curtis will give that prize it's called a George Walker Prize, and the person that wins, Curtis will bring them all expenses paid for the Summer Institute to work with the faculty there, and we will record the work for them, and also perform it for them on a continuous basis. And that's a part of another space we try to do. Like similar to what, let's say, the Boston Symphony did when they premiered Firebird. They didn't just play it once. I mean, it's almost continuous until it became a part of the main repertoire. So for composers that we have worked with, we're doing new works, but we're always bringing those other works back continuously, always talking to other ensembles about, hey, sharing that to them, so they're performing it. So hopefully we're putting it in a relevant space, in our artistic community, beyond just the Rich Chamber players. I mean, every year I think we've done at least 2 to 3 premiere works that were written for us. Right. Just last week, James Lee, we premiered his new work he did for soprano, cello, and piano. Fantastic young black composer. Teaches at Morgan State, but he's really, really doing some incredible things nationally. So I think, and we approached the concert series first because, like you were saying, we didn't want to be and it's not, I'm hesitating because I don't want it's not to take away from how anyone else does it, but we want it to be in the community and work within that community. Stable, a continuous presence in their life, so they can, like you say, of course, do the work in the community, so we can start building the audience change we want to see, and the stage change we want to see. So, and we hope we do it with excellence, because that's also to the forefront. We don't want to I think we all, okay, I'm gonna say something real plain. I think we all grew up, if you're black or brown, Latino, or whatever, when we go to some of these places, if we for ourselves, we know we have to be almost like 300, 400 times better so we can look to be on the same level.
And then you may get noticed then.
Yes. so that's all, I mean, that's all of our thoughts. So we strive to present excellence as best we can, because we know, even, how those opinions are, and it's still hard to shake in a lot of these communities, but we certainly attempt to do that. So.
Great, thank you, thank you. Let me speak for just a minute.
We should, and when are we going to do like a joint something?
Oh, but, hey,
Like an
right
hour,
after
like
Sphinx,
an hour
man.
and a half.
It's 4 hours, man. What are you talking about, man?
4
You are
hours?
lying to the people. These are beautiful people. Don't lie to them.
Wait a minute, because it's an hour and a half for me to get from Orlando, and then you're right there, right?
Are you that close?
Yeah.
Now I'm embarrassed. Shame for shame.
It's okay. It's okay. Florida was such a big state too, but yeah, because you're right on the 4 corridor.
Between Tampa and Orlando,
Right.
inland.
Mhm.
So thank you, Terrence. So let me show you, in as much as we are alike, let me show you the difference between voices and what we do and Ritz. And I'm gonna be plain as well. I want to. My dream was to present classical music to a demographic of to a demographic of people who couldn't care less about it, right? And I want to put this out there. I brought some wonderful colleagues from New York and Boston down to do some Beethoven quartets. We've done immersive Beethoven quartets in several seasons, and it happened to be all African Americans this time, and I do that a lot. But I remember when I was bringing them from the airport to Winter Haven, and they said this 5 or 6 times each if they didn't say it once. They looked around, and they're like, wow, Winter Haven, Florida. I feel I could maybe get lynched here. My life is in danger. Derek, seriously, they're like, where did the Trayvon Martin thing happen? I'm like, yeah, just that down the street that way. And so they, and we're getting ready to go to dress rehearsal, like, wow, a lot of moss on the trees. I could be swinging and they weren't kidding. So I want to do something. I've done something a little bit more sneaky, because the demographic I'm trying to serve and to educate, in addition to young black men and women seeing me, not even in light skin, like I was saying last night, I'm not Lena Horne, I can't pass. I'm black, man. You know what I'm saying? And so I want people to see me, right, with tattoos all over me, and I'm a junk talking guy in the classroom. But I want them to see that my real passion is in playing some of the classics, and as a jazzer, playing the classic bebop charts. But I also, forgive me, want to engage the redneck hick in Florida. I got to do this, because I'm like, and I'm not going to come up to him and say, I want you to respect me because I play the cello. No, I'm going to do something better. I'm going to ask you in suit and tie if I can come to your church and do a Beethoven string quartet. I don't owe you that entire body is going to be black people. I don't have to tell you that. But when we come on stage wearing our best and we lay down late Beethoven, I know that many black bodies on stage made a palpable impact. You know what I'm saying? I want to let these individuals know, man, look back through your history books. We've been important for a long period of time. And so I make sure that I bring a lot of black musicians. I bring Latino. I also, I'm very good friends with a composer in New York by the name of Eve Beglarian. I love her work. I did a voiceover for her when she came to Houston in the 90s, I believe. And she's of a certain demographic, and I brought her during March, Women's History Month, but I didn't make anything public about her personal predilections or anything. And I didn't say, here's a nice female composer. Here is a living composer, period. And she's important. And I think when I start talking like this, we look at Charles Mingus, who is one of my role models, and you see a lot of videos of him and you read stories of him losing his temper and beating up musicians because they didn't do what he wanted. And we look at him as this great jazz player. Charles Mingus wanted to be looked at like Aaron Copland, Stravinsky, and everybody, an American composer, not a black composer, a composer of music, you dig? And so I try to have conversations with the audience about this as we're presenting. And another program I did, which was successful, was a string quartet of Beethoven, and I called it Beethoven and the Muhammad Ali syndrome. And what I did is I synced up some movements from the Seventh Symphony of Beethoven to fight videos of Muhammad Ali, and I compared how both of these guys were ostensibly the best in their field and told the public they were, right? And I sort of made this comparison, and I'm like, I don't know. A lot of people maybe had problems with Beethoven. Not maybe, they did have problems, but he always stuck by his genius, much like Muhammad Ali. So they have this thing in common, and I hope it seemed to be very relevant and pertinent to the young students at Polk State. But this leads me to sort of, before we take some questions here, it leads me to my last little thing I want to say is that I believe that we stand at a very interesting precipice in history right now, where due to the amount of technology and being in the information age, and the information age being ripe right now, there are so many people of color at the forefront making things happen. We're having a renaissance of interest in the works of the great Quincy Jones, right? By reading these really shockingly candid interviews with him, there's this new documentary in which he challenges us to be leaders for the next generations coming on. There's Kendrick Lamar getting the Pulitzer Prize, man. And I remember in recent enough time, Bun B taught sort of a rap theory course for a few semesters at Rice University. There's universities that teach a whole section on Parliament Funkadelic, George Clinton, and text painting. You know what I'm saying? Get on down, you dig? And so I think it's a wonderful time for persons of color, artists of color, to show, hey man, we're actually, as I started by saying, history is a narrative. We can shape that narrative, and we are doing that, right? So I just wanted to throw that out there. And we have a question. Sir, please.
Hi, my name is Eric Williamson. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm director of school outreach there. Also, thank you to InTempo for your wonderful programming. Just an inspiring video. It seems to me that the trend is in K through 12 education and community organizations that there is an hyper awareness of cultural sensitivity, and our programming is very intentional. We're making connections with the community, but there's a disconnect when it comes to higher education, conservatories and universities who are perpetuating this notion of white Western classical music as an end-all, be-all. So I wonder if there's a way that we can add an urgency to bringing more cultural competency and responsiveness to higher education, so our students who are experiencing these wonderful programs don't feel lost or dismayed. And also, these are all thinking about that the people at the university level are our future musicians, are our future educators. How can we add an urgency to people in higher education to be more culturally relevant and more culturally responsive and therefore excellent?
I think some people are that's a great question, yeah. Oh, y'all go ahead. I don't want to stop the applause. You always like, speaking of George Walker, I think we were talking about Kelly, a violinist, Kelly Hall Tompkins, and he was asking her about playing a work. And she was like, oh, I don't know it at all. He said, well, Eastman didn't educate you. Basically, you didn't get a full education, is what his point is, because they should have included black composers, and especially George Walker, because he went there and won the Pulitzer. But and I get his point. It's true. But aren't you in a position to kind of help shape that already? Okay, we're going to include some black composers that you shouldn't understand, or to fill out your education for that community. That was shame I shouldn't ask you the question again, but it's great that you're in a position to kind of start moving that dial, because since you're in that space. So I think you should maybe have a look at that generally. And now I'm on the diversity council at the Peabody Conservatory, because they're trying to address that generally, you know. And I think in a real way, they're really going to try to. Well, all the notes, I missed a lot of the meetings, but in what the notes that I'm reading afterwards, they're really asking those questions of us, and how I can really make the change to fully educate the students that go there. So I think some people are starting. I know there's a couple more diversity panels that are starting in conservatories generally, but I think I don't know if it's out that they're completed with it, but I think they're attempting to start addressing that. Same way they have to address that, okay, like all of these kids are not going to go out and get managers. Managers are different. You have to learn how to run an operation, how to market yourself, how to do all of those type of things, I think.
I think that our role as artists and our positions of power as artists, we need to see ourselves as those conduits for change. So when I was an undergraduate at the University of Connecticut, my music history professors were not even addressing, the things that I'm doing right now. But my role as a student, even as a self-empowerment thing, was to program that repertoire, to do that tour, to get my provost to do a specific concert. And I think that that's our role here at SphinxConnect and through all of our careers, to really make that change come about and really ask for change and hold them accountable. Continue programming Beethoven String Quartet in your recital, but also adding something else and showing them that it's not that difficult to go into what other institutions might think of adventurous programming, but it's just really bringing in the audience member, making that connection, connecting the dots, engaging with different partners, and just seeing that it's a no-brainer and it's not costing them anything, or it's not pushing the institutions to make that change.
Very good. Thank you. Do we have any Slido questions, Noah?
We did have one come in that oftentimes PhDs have the final say-so of relevance and excellency in our society. And so going off of that, what was the major influence that pushed you to become a college professor?
Oh, my God. I have to answer that one. I'm going to answer this honestly. It had to be the universe that pushed me towards doing it, because I never wanted to be a college professor. So there's a statement by, I think, Maxim, I can't remember the guy's last name, Yevtuchenko. And he says, I will pursue my career by not pursuing it. I'm a follower of what's known as the path, and I believe in karma, and I sort of just intuitively know where I should be at what time. And I think that per Rumi, there's always an infinitude of opportunities round about you, constantly. And it's about availing oneself to them. And at one point in my life, an opportunity to become a professor came, and I accepted it. And I always kept one foot out the door saying, I really don't want to stay here, really don't want to stay here. And then I've been there for 15 years, you dig? So it's got to be the universe. But I also have found, my late father was an educator, my mom, I come from a lineage of educators. Being a professor is a wonderful thing. I love it. Being a PhD, getting a PhD is important because I just love to learn. I can't be a teacher if I'm not a student, you dig? We have another question here.
Yeah, well, first I just want to thank you all for doing what you're doing. You guys are all amazing. Going back to the last thing that Angie said, adventurous programming, why is inclusive programming adventurous programming, I guess, is something that I'm perplexed by, and I think we should all be perplexed by. But my question to you guys, and I probably know the answer, but I think it's important to say it and hear it in this room. For you, doing programming that others may consider to be risky, right? What I want to know is, have you ever done a program where you're like, I took it too far? Or that really pissed someone off?
Yes. I have 5 minutes. Oh, this will be quick. I had a good girlfriend of mine. She came to me because she's a wonderful, she's a white woman, and she was like, oh, I wrote a kind of a speech for herself, and she was like, I want to set it to music. Can you add, get me with a cellist or something like that? I was like, sure. So I put it up with Tahira, and she put this whole kind of story together about her coming out of racism. She starts her speech, I should say, saying she was born a Southern white racist. And the whole thing moved or how she came out of that. Well, anyway, we decided to program it ourselves on one of our concerts, and and it was fine. I was like, and it's funny because we did the first one at in Jacksonville. We have the Common Museum of Art and Gardens, and we do an afternoon series there, and it was, I think, probably maybe 2 black people there, and the whole other place was white. So, and I was standing there, and then I saw this guy come up to me. I didn't come here to get preached to. I was like, whoops. Well, okay. Yeah, so that type of programming, I'm not sure.
I think I would look at it now that I didn't take it too far. Maybe I did it too soon. And that's what I'm looking back in retrospect. I may have programmed something 5 years ago where the audience was still not prepared for it yet. I knew what I was thinking and what I was doing, but I encourage everybody to really hold your audience's hands and take them on a journey. And what I think about now is I know what I want to program 5 years from now, but every year I start getting them teasers and building my whole strategy and messaging around what's going to come up in 5 years from now. So maybe that's something that, in my personal opinion, but I don't think my audience has taken too far. I think there's a lot more to come for them.
Wayne?
Quickly, I can recall more than one occasion where it may have taken things too far, and all those involved are aware, but I don't see any need to celebrate that beyond that circle.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm sorry we couldn't get to the last question. Maybe when we leave you could ask us. Thank you so much for coming to this roundtable. I hope you got something from it. I certainly did. Thank you so much again.